We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 this evening. Does anyone need a copy of the worksheet? We're in Ecclesiastes 5 and 6 tonight. Last time we studied, we had gone through verses 1 through 7 of Ecclesiastes 5, just noticing some things it talks about concerning both making vows, keeping vows, being careful how you talk when you come before the Lord, and things about that was going on during temple worship, and why keeping a vow when you come before the Lord was important when you were in the temple or tabernacle. And so here, we're in verse 8, beginning in verse 8 this evening on page 3. Again, this is all coming from the King James Version. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, beginning in verse 8, it says, "If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment, and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. There is a sore evil, which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for their owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail. And he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hands. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the winds? All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. Because that which I have seen, or rather, behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. Every man also, to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart." And so looking here in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he's again looking at the topic of earthly wealth here in chapter 5, beginning with verse 8. And he notices something here when he talks about the poor, those who don't have earthly wealth. He says, of course, to not be shocked when there's corruption taking place, when there's corruption in government. Let's actually go ahead and go back to verse 8 and 9 there. It's interesting. It's interesting also that Solomon brings this up because he's king. I mean, think about that. Solomon is king of Israel. Solomon is the most wealthy king. Solomon has probably been the most wisest person to live in Israel by this point. All of these different things are attributed to him. He even mentioned all the wealth he owned back in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. He talked about how he planted gardens and vineyards for himself and had different, basically, pools of water set up so that way they could make sure to water those particular plants, and how he had all those various hobbies and all those various slaves and servants and all those concubines. He had everything. Just about everything the physical world could offer him back in that time. And of course, he would say all is vanity, all is futile, it's useless in striving for wind. You're just wasting time and basically wasting, you're just putting a bunch of effort into it, trying to find happiness in that, and you can't. And so here in chapter 5, though, when he says this, it's interesting. He has all that power, and he says there's corruption. He recognized that there was corruption probably even in his own governments. It's interesting, again, if thou seest the oppression of the poor, verse 8, if thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. And basically, some people think, well, what's that saying? Is that saying that God is watching? Well, no. If you actually read the New American Standard Version, it's interesting. The New American Standard Version, the 1995 version, there's like 3 different ones. But the New American Standard Version of Ecclesiastes chapter 5 here, looking at verses 8 and 9, it's interesting the verbiage used here. Again, Ecclesiastes 5, 8, and 9 of the New American Standard Version says, if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. You see, the point is, politicians tend to watch each other's backs. That's the point. That's why there's corruption. You may have a corrupt leader and it's continuing to go on and it keeps going on, but guess what? The reason why that's going on and nobody's stopping him is because someone's watching their back. And somebody's watching that person's back. And somebody's watching that person's back. You see, corruption, when there's corruption and it's not getting dealt with, that usually implies that there's more than one person involved. It's not usually just one person is in charge and one person is corrupt and things like that. Usually there's several people involved and people higher than them watching their backs. It's interesting. Verse 9, moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. If you actually look at the New American Standard Version, after all, a king who cultivates the land is an advantage to the land. The point is this, that he's getting at with this statement. He's saying that, look, even though there's corruption, as long as a king is making sure his people is fed, he's going to be he's going to be praised by the people. You see, think about the Soviet Union. People were going hungry. And there was corruption. You had both of those two going on. That's the reason why it fell. Sure, if the Soviet Union was, I'll just say it like this again. If you have those two things put together, people going hungry and corruption, the government's going to fail. You see, it's always going to fail if you have those two things going on. And so that's what we're kind of seeing here. If the king, even if there's corruption, if the king's keeping his people fed, people are going to praise the king. People are going to overlook the oppression, you see. They shouldn't, but they're still going to do it, you see. Any questions or comments on that?
My husband used to say, he can't keep what he's got, he's not going.
Yeah. And that applies a lot with what he's going to bring up next then. After he brings up oppression of the poor and things like that, it says, verse 13, there is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for their owners thereof to their hurts. I actually skipped ahead a few verses. Actually, verse 10 says, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver. The New American Standard says money. Most translations say money. He who loves money or silver will not be satisfied with that. Nor he that loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. In other words, money will not satisfy you. You get $1 million, guess what? You're going to want another $1 million. You're going to want maybe to get up to that billionaire status. You want a zero added to your net worth, if you will, boosting you up a zero, 10 times, 10 times the amount you want or twice the amount you want. It's just going to keep going. A person that's a millionaire today, they look at that, they say, well, that's not going to carry me over into retirement. I need $2 million or $4 million. And it just keeps going over and over and over again. Again, that's what happens. And so, again, you're not going to be satisfied. If that's what your heart's desire is, if that's where you're trying to find happiness, if you're trying to find purpose, anything like that in money, you're not going to find it. If you're going to try and find satisfaction, guess what? You got $1 million, but the person 3 doors down has $2 million, has $1 billion. You got the world's first trillionaire, Elon Musk. Again, there's a reason why people don't stop at $1 billion. You see, they don't say, okay, I got $1 billion. I'm selling it all off and I'm going to retire and stay home. No, they go to the next, they want the next billion and another billion, another billion. Keeps going on down the list. Any questions or comments on that? It's interesting. He keeps bringing these things up. Verse 11, of course, says this. It says, when goods increase, they are increased at Edom. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? Money, the point of that is that money attracts dependence. For example, if I suddenly became a billionaire or several multimillionaire, maybe $100 million I somehow inherited, I could guarantee you if I had family, if my family found out about that, not immediate family, but like maybe distant, third cousins, extended family, they'll be calling my phone. Hey, you need to share the wealth. I could point you to some relatives, very distant relatives, who are in massive credit card debt, and they'd say, hey, you help me pay the credit card debt off? And I'd be like, okay, I'll help you. And then I give them the money they need, and they don't put a penny of it towards getting out of debt. They'd probably go to Las Vegas and things like that. Some of them would put it towards drugs. Again, extended family. Not immediate family, extended family. I could point you to several ones that are way there into like the second and third cousin status and things like that. But anyways, again, looking at all of this, again, it's saying that people are going to come and say, you need to share the wealth. You need to share the wealth with us. It attracts dependence, you see. Elon Musk, we just make the point here that Elon Musk, the world's first trillionaire, has multiple people in government and elsewhere shouting that he should, or that he needs to share the wealth. Now, of course, we need to share. If we were rich, if we're rich, we need to share with the poor. We see that in places like 1 Timothy chapter 6. It talks about that in 1 Timothy chapter 6 when Paul tells Timothy, remind those who are rich in the present world to be generous toward those who are not. Paul said that to Timothy, to share to help, you see. But there's a difference between that and saying, you need to, trying to force someone to do it. There's a difference between voluntary and forced, you see. And some of that is even, if you actually pay attention to what some of these government officials say, they'll say, well, you need to put it towards our special LGBTQ programs and stuff like that. They're not wanting it to go toward people that need it. They want it to go towards, all this sinful stuff in the world. Planned Parenthood, things like that. Abortion, funding that stuff. And so, again, it's just a double standard where they try to take advantage of one thing. They say, you need to share the wealth, and then they put it towards something that's regarding sin. So, anyways, we'll move on from there. But again, sometimes family and close friends come along begging for money. Money attracts dependence. People that aren't even going to use it for themselves, they're going to use it on something frivolous, if you will. Something where they're just going to throw it out. Like, again, gambling and other things. Gambling, drugs, other things. That it attracts people that are just going to be dependents on that point. They're going to depend on you for money. Oh, you're a billionaire. Well, can't you give me another $1 million? Yeah, I know I went to Las Vegas, but can you give me another one? Another $1 million to help me pay off credit card debt? Things like that. It's interesting. He says in verse 12, following up with that, he says, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich man will not suffer him to sleep. Money can cause worry because you're just building up wealth and you're becoming rich. And guess what? If that's all you're focused on, if you're not focused on, having faith in God, if you're not focused on God and having the right relationship with God, if you don't have God in your life and you're just focused on your wealth and things like that, guess what? You're going to be worried. What about this investment? What about this? What about this company I own? Things like that. You're going to be, again, worrying. You might be worried about a relative, asking to borrow money, worried about old friends asking to borrow money, things like that. If I don't give them money, their mom's going to call my mom and she's going to yell at her, and then, just things like that. Again, when people don't have a life with God and their life is focused on wealth and not on God, this is what tends to happen, you see. He can't sleep well at night. If that's his goal and focus is just on money. Because he's always going to be worried about something happening to that money. If money is his goal, if money is his purpose, if money is where he finds joy, then money he's going to be worrying about again and again and again. Any questions or comments on that? Letter D on page 5 says, money can cause worry. A wealthy person can often be concerned with holding on to and increasing their wealth, again, to the point that's where their mind is all the time. Letter E, money can be misused, and then nothing is left for the next generation. That's verses 13 and 14. Back on page 4, there is a sore evil, which I have seen under the sun. Again, that phrase under the sun just means here on earth. Namely, riches kept for their owners thereof to their hurt. In other words, they keep the riches and it hurts them. But then verse 14, but those riches perish by evil travail. In other words, they keep their riches and they're hoping that they can keep them, and they're just so worried and concerned about their wealth, like we just talked about with verse 12. And guess what happens? Those riches, verse 14, but those riches perish by evil travail. And he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. In other words, something happens to his money. Maybe it gets stolen. Maybe it gets taken from him. Maybe it gets, lost through a bad investment. As a matter of fact, I think the New American Standard even says that. If you actually look in Ecclesiastes 5, verse 14 says, when those riches were lost through a bad investment, and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. The point is, he somehow loses it. Maybe he invested in something and it's all gone. Well, now he dies and his son's left with nothing. You see, that's the point. His son's left with nothing. And so he's saying that that's evil because he loses it. He lost it and he can't give his son anything. You see. Any questions or comments on that? He continues on in verse with, of course, letter F in the outline on page 5. We cannot take money with us when we die. Look at verse 15 and 16. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that he hath labored for the wind? Again, striving for wind, laboring for wind, working for the wind and everything. This is the idea that you're just going to leave all your wealth when you die. It's interesting. Paul made this comment. Paul made this statement back over in 2 Timothy. Turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 6. 2 Timothy chapter 6. I want you to see this. Or my apologies, 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. I want you to see this. Someone read for us 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7.
For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out.
Exactly. What are we seeing there? What's Paul saying?
You came in without something, and you go back without something.
Yeah, we can't take anything with us. We come into this world owning nothing. We don't even leave this world with a shirt on our back. We're not taking the shirt with us. We're not taking our clothes with us. We're not taking anything. We come into this world with nothing. We leave with nothing. You see, we come into this world dirt poor, if you will. We leave this world dirt poor. Just think about that. Again, we end up with all of this. All of this is pointing to the fact that we can't take anything when we die. He pointed to this very fact back in chapter 2. Again, he said he looked at all his wealth, all that he had acquired, and it was all useless. And he talks about how he doesn't get to take it with him when he dies. He says what happens is you labor, you gather up some things. Guess what? You die, you leave it all here, you become dirt, you're forgotten. You see, all of that you see back in chapter 2. Everything that we can possibly acquire on this earth, every physical thing, is not going with us when we die. Money especially, but, well, I should say money included in all of that. Any questions or comments on that? He continues on with verse 17. All his days, he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. This is talking about a rich man who doesn't have God in his life. Look at these next verses with me. Without God, this goes back to letter G, without God, even being wealthy is useless. That's his whole point there. Verses 18 through 20, notice this again. Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun, all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. In other words, just enjoy life. And he's talking about enjoying life with God, if you pay attention to the rest of this. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him. The New American Standard says, keeps him occupied with the gladness or joy of his heart. If he's focused on God, if he's focused on being pleasing to God and doing in this life what he needs to do to be pleasing to God, he's going to have purpose, he's going to have joy, and he's not going to be sad like the man who does not have God. He's not going to be laboring in vain for the one who doesn't have God. Any questions or comments on that? And a lot having to deal with earthly wealth in those verses. Chapter 6 then. Chapter 6 is an interesting chapter. It really shows basically the things of the world cannot satisfy. I want you to see this here. Verse 1 of chapter 6 begins, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun. Again, that means here on earth. And it is common among men. A man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof. But a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. If a man beget 100 children, and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. In other words, eternal life here on earth. He doesn't get buried. That's what he's talking about here. Verse 4, for he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he hath not seen the sun, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. Yea, though he live 1,000 years twice told. 2,000 years. Just imagine that. Solomon says, even if you live to be 2,000 years old, which I'm not aware, the Bible doesn't describe anyone getting to even 1,000. We read about Methuselah, he got to 969. That was it. Maybe he could have lived older, I don't know. We read that he died during the same year as the flood. But it says in verse 7, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. For what hath the wise man more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wondering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man, neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow, for who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? The King James Version is very interesting in verbalizing some of these things. But the point of this section is just showing the things of this world cannot satisfy. If you could have eternal life, eternal physical life, guess what? An untimely birth is better than they. That's basically kind of the idea of being miscarried right there. It's better to be miscarried than to have eternal life on earth. Notice some of these things, though. Letter B on page 6. A man gets wealthy. This is what we're seeing described here. A man gets wealthy, then he loses his wealth because he doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't get a chance to enjoy it with God. So some people have tried to make arguments on what this means. I'll just throw out some of what's going on when it's talking about this stranger, what several have said. Some have suggested that it could be that someone stole them. This analogy is one that kind of confuses people. Some people say, well, maybe he's stealing them. Another one says in verse 3, or rather number 3 there on page 6, letter B, it could be that since the man did not honor or praise God, God took them away and gave them to someone else. It could be that the stranger who is enjoying them is one of those relatives mentioned back in Ecclesiastes 5:11. Again, comes and starts begging for money because he finds out his relative's rich. Either way, he doesn't enjoy a life with God and this wealth. Some have even made this argument. I read it somewhere, but I've lost it where I read it. But someone offered the thought that this could be that he's got all this wealth. He's got all this wealth, and he's got all of this, and he has it, but then he looks to a stranger, and they've got more wealth than he does. And so he's looking to the stranger and saying, well, that other guy, he's got more than I do. And so he doesn't enjoy his wealth because he's focused on someone else's wealth. I think that may be more along the lines of what he's talking about here. He doesn't enjoy it. A stranger enjoys it. Means that this other guy who's wealthier than he is, he's mad, he's jealous, and so he doesn't enjoy the wealth that he's accumulated, that he's acquired with God. Any questions or comments there from those first 2 verses? And I can't remember where I read that, but that was one thought that I think may more align with this passage here. Letter C says, of course, on page 6, a man cannot find worthwhile happiness in having children and living long. There's a reason why I say this, why this passage is even talking about this. Because, again, I'll just read verses 3 through 5 for you again. It says, if a man beget 100 children. There's not a lot of people who have, I'm not aware of many people who've ever had 100 children. But just think about this. Maybe back in old days when there were concubines and stuff. But again, 100 children. He has 100 children. He lives many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good. And also that he have no burial. I say that an untimely birth is better than he. For he cometh in with vanity. Again, vanity is futile, it's useless. He comes in useless, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he hath not seen the sun, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. The one that dies of a miscarriage has more rest than the one who has all of that. Again, he brings up, he could have 2,000 years. He could live 2,000 years. He says 1,000 years twice told. 2,000 years old. He could be the richest man. He could have multiple children, 100 children. But he says that it would be, that you can't find happiness in that. And the reason why he says this is because, just think about it from this perspective. Sometimes children completely reject their parents. They don't want anything to do with their parents. I could point you to several very good, faithful brethren who have children who want nothing to do with them. They have children who don't want to do anything with them. They don't have their phone number. They can't contact them. And vice versa. The parents don't want anything to do with the children sometimes. A different situation. Again, just situations like that where people don't want anything. Or rather, I should say, where that stuff like that happens. Sometimes, again, it's just this whole idea that, you can have that. You can have 100 children, but here's the thing. Even your children are going to eventually die someday. Even your children are eventually going to pass on after you, sometimes before, sometimes after. And the point that he's saying here is that, look, you're not going to be remembered. They're not going to be remembered. Your grandchildren aren't going to be remembered. There's no purpose in trying to find happiness there. You need to find happiness in God. You need to teach your children to find happiness in God. You see. Any questions or comments on that? Again, this is what he's getting at here, that you can't find happiness. You can't find happiness even if you tried. If you somehow found a way to live 2,000 years. Just think of that, living 2,000 years. If Solomon had lived 2,000 years, he would have lived to see the Battle of Hastings. Think about that. which took place, I think, in 1066. He would have lived to see the Battle of Hastings. Solomon was born about 1000 BC, somewhere around there. So just think about that. He would have lived to see that. He would have lived to see the church. He would have lived to see all of that stuff. But anyways, even if a man lived 2,000 years, he ain't going to find happiness in that, in long life. Why? Because even if you could somehow find happiness in living the longest possible life ever on the face of the earth, you're still going to die. That's his whole point. You're still going to die. You're still going to become dirt. And even if you did live a really, really long life, you're going to be forgotten. You're going to be forgotten. People aren't going to know who you were 200 years after you were dead. Nobody's going to know who you were. Nobody's going to know what your personality was. Yeah, they may know your name and know that you existed, but they may not know your personality, anything like that. And so, again, he's made this point before. Long life. You cannot find happiness in trying to have a long life. It's interesting. He's actually going to bring this up in about chapter 7 and 8. He's going to start talking about using wickedness to try and prolong your life. A wicked man may prolong his life in his wickedness. And he's going to say even that is vanity, because even though you can prolong your life, even if a person could somehow use sin, and people have, to make their life longer on the face of the earth, they're still going to die. They're still going to be buried. They're still going to become dirt. They're still going to be forgotten. Any questions or comments on that? Again, that's what he's getting at there. You can't find happiness and purpose in physical things. You got to find it in God. That's what he has just said in chapter 5, at the end of chapter 5. You got to find it in God. You look at letter D. A man cannot find happiness in living thousands of years. That's verse 6. Looking at page 6 again, letter E. When a man wanders around looking for purpose in life without God, he will never find happiness. He will only wear himself out. Look here in verse 7 and 9. Let's just look at this again. All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. In other words, a person, he labors and labors and labors. He gets food. Guess what? Yes, he eats. Maybe he gets full for a little bit, but he's going to get hungry again. Person labors, gets food, eats, he's going to get hungry again. You see, it's not going to come to the point where a person gets fully satisfied to where they never need to eat physical food again. Even Jesus talked about this when he said, don't labor for the food which perishes. And he would talk about some of that stuff in John chapter 6, and he would talk about how, again, when you approach it, physical food, a person who eats physical food is just going to get hungry again. If you look at when he was talking to the woman in Samaria at the well, what did he say? He said, he who drinks this water is going to get thirsty again. You see, that's a paraphrase, but I mean, that kind of reflects here. A person ain't going to get satisfied with fully satisfied to where they don't need physical food or water again. There's just no way you can do that. The body needs water. You can't just have some water now or have a bunch of water now and hope to not need water later. Same thing with food. You can't go to, let's say, the Chinese buffet down the road and say, I'm going to, try to eat all the food that you can there and then hope that tomorrow you're not going to need food. You can't do that. Now, some people wish they could. I'm pretty sure a lot of people wish they could. Some people feel like it maybe if they really, chow down there. But again, you can't be satisfied in that because, again, you're going to get hungry again. You're going to get thirsty again. Verse 8, what hath the wise man more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Just better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. It just goes all over the place. Person may be hungry. Person may be thirsty. Person may want something. Person may want to get wealthy. Person may want to live long. Just go down the list. The desire just flows all over the place. You're not going to find purpose in the things of the world because it's just going to be one thing after another, you see. Whereas if a person has God, then that's the one purpose. As long as they're focused on God, that's something they can stay focused on, you see. Whereas a person's desire goes from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another. Can't find purpose in anything of those things, any purpose or happiness. Any questions or comments on that? Again, some of this is, Solomon goes very deep on a lot of these things. Solomon goes very deep and on what we're reading here. Looking at letter F then, on page 6. These things have always been the same and will not change. Verse 10 and 12, that's what he's saying here. That which hath been is named already. He's said this before. That which is that which has already been done. Is there any one of which one might say, see, this is new? He said that back in Ecclesiastes 1. Already, it's been around since the beginning. There's trouble in the world. There's corruption in the world. Guess what? There's always been corruption in the world. If there's poor being oppressed, guess what? The poor have always been oppressed. And there will always be the poor. Jesus said, the poor you have with you always. Again, that which has been is that which will be. Regardless of technological advances, there's always going to be, again, something that's already existed. Labor, we've never come to a point in life where we never needed to labor. We've always had to work. For 6,000 plus years, mankind has needed to work. He even says this, it's interesting, verse 11, seeing that there be many things that increase vanity, increase uselessness. What is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in his life, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow? For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? To wrestle him that is mightier, basically based on this verbiage here we see through verses 10 through 12, that man is to wrestle with God. You see, who can wrestle with God over these things is what he's asking. People wrestle with God when they try to find purpose in a life without him. People wrestle with God when they try to find what's going to be in the future when they can't know. We don't know what's going to happen 200 years from now. We don't know what the corruption's going to look like. We don't know what anything else is going to look like. We don't know. Again, people wrestle with God when they try to find purpose without him. They wander around only to fail. Any questions or comments on that? A lot of things here. Again, just a lot of things that go really deep here in Ecclesiastes, especially chapter 6. He just goes in very deep in every possible way here on earth, every way that people try to find purpose without God, every possible form of trying to find purpose without God, and every he looks at corruption, he looks at all the horrible things that happen in life, and he says, look, you need life with God. That's the whole point of this book. He even said that back in chapter 2. He said, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? The whole purpose of the book is to show, and he'll even say this in the conclusion, that one needs God, one needs God in their life. And not only that, but he'll actually conclude the book by saying this in chapter 12. The end of the matter is this: fear God and keep his commandments. That will be the last couple of verses of the book. That's the conclusion of the matter, is what he'll call it. A person needs God. A person needs to fear God. A person needs to obey God. Without God, this life has nothing. This life can give us nothing. Any questions or comments before we conclude there? I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. So much stuff there in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and 6. Lord willing, we'll get into chapter 7 and 8. There's going to be several things in chapter 7 and 8 we'll get into. There's going to be a lot of words of wisdom he gives, facts about wisdom. He's going to talk about one's attitude toward leaders and again, speak about more on man's purpose and need for God. And he's going to address, again, some different things that are really important for us to think about. A lot of this, actually all of this is being written. One thing to remember, this stuff is being written by someone who God gave an understanding heart to when he was young. And so Solomon at this time is probably the wisest person that ever lived. He is someone who asked God for wisdom. And he's someone who not only got that when he was young, but he also grew and began to understand things a little more clearer. Any questions or comments on that? Lot of things here in Ecclesiastes. Just a lot here in chapter 7 and 8. There's going to be a lot in 9 and 10, and also in 11 and 12. Just a whole bunch of stuff he addresses throughout this book. It's a sobering book, Ecclesiastes. It sobers us to get to understanding the fact this life has nothing to offer us apart from God. If we're trying to live life without God, we're not going to find happiness. We're not going to find purpose. We're not going to find meaning. We're just going to find maybe some temporary enjoyments and distractions, and then we die and are forgotten. Any questions or comments? I know I said that already, but does anyone have anything to say before we close tonight? I want to thank everyone for your attention this evening.